I want to turn now to the legislation we started talking about a little bit earlier in Congress. It's called H.R. 1. It passed the House. It's a bill that would require states to, among other things, automatically register voters, have a minimum number of voting days, and it also proposes solutions to fight gerrymandering. Republicans are opposed to the legislation. Democrats hope to pass it by getting rid of the filibuster. But Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia all but killed that idea this week.
Would you be willing to pass the For the People's Act by killing the filibuster? Would you be willing to carve out an exception on that bill? Never,
I've been very, very clear. I think if you read my op-ed, it was very clear. I think we can find a pathway forward. I really do. You just cannot work in the fringes. We want fair, open, secured elections. And Georgia has done some things which I thought were just atrocious.
So, Eamon, what now? Is Joe Manchin right that he can find Republicans for it? It doesn't seem like there are 10 that I can count for it. Does this mean this bill that passed the House, it's dead? Is that right?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think ultimately the filibuster reform effort is dead, at least dead-ish, dead for now, as dead as anything gets in American politics, where life can be very long. Manchin said in his op-ed this week, under no circumstance will he vote to remove or weaken the filibuster. They need his vote to do that, so that seems pretty Sherman-esque, right, that he's not going to do that. Now, politicians have been known to change their mind in the past, but assume for a moment that that's dead. That means your voting effort in the House, if you're a Democrat, it doesn't look really great in terms of getting to the president's desk for a signature. But Democrats did get this sort of new lifeline in terms of this ruling that they can now use the reconciliation process, which allows you to get that lower vote threshold, which is why it's important. It's to do with the budget process, but it gets you a 50 vote threshold instead of a 60 vote threshold. Democrats can get over that 50 vote threshold if they hang together. If they can use that process more than once a year, the old assumption had been you only get one crack at that a year. Now the new ruling is, you might be able to do this more than once a year. That changes the ball game. That's like you're playing Uno and you just got a stack of wild cards. So now Democrats can look at that and say, well, okay, we can't go the filibuster route, but what can we stuff in a budget bill that has all of our priorities in it and can use the reconciliation process and can get that 50 vote threshold? That's going to be a fascinating question as it unravels throughout the course of the year. How many bites at the apple do they get now? We used to think they only got one. Now maybe it's a bit of a new world.
Right. But Jane, to that point, usually budget reconciliation, we don't need to go in the weeds here, but you need to put things in there that are related to the budget, and the voting rights seems unlikely to pass the parliamentarians' muster on that one. So this is an interesting choice for President Biden now. Where does he use his political capital, right? Does he go and keep pushing on this, even though it's pretty clear that, well, he might not have the votes? But does he try to use his political capital there? Or, as we seem to be seeing, he's going around the country talking much more about his infrastructure plan. So what does this tell you about the priority then for this White House on these issues?
Well, I mean, it certainly seems that right now the priority is probably the infrastructure bill. But I think there's the slightest wiggle room still. I wouldn't pronounce H.R. 1 or Senate Bill 1 dead yet, because there's one possibility still there, or one or two, which are that it's possible. Biden has talked about how he wants as little change in the Senate rules as is necessary to pass the legislation. And among the things he's talked about maybe supporting is changing the filibuster so that it goes back to the original way that it was done with talking filibusters, which means sort of like the old movies. They have to stand up and night after night and day after day, hour after hour, keep arguing for something. It's possible Manchin might support something like that. That is not killing the filibuster. It's just kind of restoring it to its original meaning. That could be one way that this goes. I wouldn't, as I said, I wouldn't pronounce it necessarily dead yet, but it's not, the White House's priority is this infrastructure bill right now.
And Errin, if it doesn't pass, and instead then these state laws that you talked about at the beginning of the show, they go into effect, what does this mean as we're looking forward to the 2022 elections, maybe even 2024, in some of these battleground states like Georgia, like Arizona, like Texas, like Florida?
Yeah, I think that what you're going to continue to see Democratic organizers, especially Black and brown organizers who voted to make the battle of voter suppression versus voter registration and turnout, right? I mean, that was what we saw in 2020. You saw uh, organizers knowing even before a pandemic that they were up against voter suppression. The pandemic just exacerbated that. And yet they were still able to turn out record numbers of Black and brown folks who, were responding to voter suppression because, as we know, a potential opposite effect of these voter suppression laws is that it galvanizes the very people that it is intended to exclude from the franchise. And so I think that may be what we end up seeing a Democratic base in particular that is especially fired up because they know that these laws are intended to take their voting rights away from them.
I want to get to another part of this sweeping legislation, and that is one that would require so-called dark money groups to publicly say who their donors are. Jane wrote about a bombshell recording of a phone call between conservative groups and a policy advisor to Mitch McConnell in last week's New Yorker. On the tape, you can hear them strategizing about how to oppose this legislation. Let's take a listen.
Don't get into a fight in HR 1 where you engage with the other side, where they have the talking points. HR 1 stops billionaires from buying elections. Unfortunately, we found that is a winning message for both the general public and also conservatives.
That was the voice of Kyle McKenzie, the research director for the Koch-run group Stand Together. Jane, help put this into context for us. How is this conversation part of the larger strategy for Republicans following the loss of the White House in 2020?
I mean, what you're listening to is, behind the scenes, some very powerful dark money groups, big money groups, plotting with the Republican leadership in the Senate about how to kill HR 1. They see this as this bill that would require the disclosure of big secret donors. They see it as a huge threat to their power and to the fundraising that they do. And they're trying to figure out, how do we kill it? And what's so interesting is what they're saying is that the American public wants this reform. The American public does not want billionaires buying elections, and that's not just Democrats. The Republicans have tried to make it sound like this is just a Democratic trick of a bill. What they found out and what they admit to behind closed doors is this kind of reform is really popular across the political spectrum, even with very, very conservative voters. There's a sense that that elections have become corrupted by big money, and the American public overwhelmingly, in a bipartisan way, favors reform. And so what these groups are saying in this meeting, this private meeting, is the only way we can kill this thing, we want to kill these reforms, is in the back rooms of Congress, and they call it under the dome. And what they're really saying is, we're going to have to filibuster this thing. And that, again, brings you right back to Senator Joe Manchin.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because in 2020, Democrats actually raised more of this dark money than Republicans. Biden did a lot better than Trump did on it. So can't this legislation end up coming back, if it does pass, actually hurting Democrats too?
Well, it could. I mean, and it is amazing that the Democrats have not only caught up with the Republicans on dark money, but they've now outstripped them in raising this. But the thing is that that's an anomaly. It's the first time that the Democrats have raised more than the Republicans in a presidential election. And meanwhile, I mean, it's, it's proliferating. Dark money, undisclosed money from anonymous donors is exploding ever since the Supreme Court's 2010 Citizens United decision. There was $1 billion of it in the 2020 election, and the part that's growing fastest in terms of campaign money is this anonymous money. So it's a problem. It's a bipartisan problem, and neither party has a lock on the virtue here, but the Republicans generally have had the advantage with it.
Errin, I want to go back to you, sort of linking this all together here about the role that corporations can play, or outside groups can play in sort of swaying this legislation. Major League Baseball, of course, said we're not coming to Atlanta anymore. They moved to Denver to play the game. But it's not just Republicans that are criticizing Major League Baseball. A lot of Democrats in the state are too, including Stacey Abrams, who said she was disappointed with this boycott. So what does this tell us, number one, about the politics of all of this, but also just the kind of leverage that companies can really play in changing these laws, right? If both sides are saying, please don't boycott, but we also want you to make a strong stand, what can they actually do to move the needle?
Yeah, well, I think that you also saw these organizers putting pressure on these companies to do what you're seeing them attempt to get them to do in Texas right now, which is to really be kind of publicly proactive publicly before these bills pass. Delta and Coca-Cola being particularly vocal, kind of on the other side of this bill after the governor had already passed the bill, saying, "Why weren't you more public before?" There are questions about that. And you have people like Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms of Atlanta saying, she understands the decision, but she thinks it is unfortunate, and she is about other companies or events that may choose to boycott the city because that would cost. That there would be an economic cost to that. Stacey Abrams certainly is somebody who has been concerned about the potential economic cost of boycotts. I can recall when Georgia was weighing legislation around abortion that she was asking Hollywood not to boycott the state. I'm sorry, not abortion. It was when after the 2018 election, asking Hollywood not to boycott the state over the way that gubernatorial election played out. But listen, Atlanta is nicknamed the city too busy to hate, and that nickname is because there was a white business community in the Jim Crow in the Jim Crow era that decided that Atlanta was going to go in a certain direction, right? That racial harmony and equity was going to be the thing that they prioritized at that time. And so you have a long tradition and a long legacy, actually, of the business community, the white business community, really taking and saying kind of, this is not who we are. And really, companies like Delta and Coca-Cola have pretty diverse workforces. I mean, Delta's staff is something like 46% people of color. And so, to your point earlier about pressure coming internally, some of these businesses, especially when you think about their employees of color who are asking, is this, what does my workplace really stand for? What is it about? Would they want to, not say something about laws that could potentially be harmful to me as an employee? I think that is also a very powerful message and very powerful pressure.
Eamon, just with the 30 seconds or so we have left, we've heard some of these state legislators threaten to retaliate against some companies, saying we're going to get rid of your tax breaks, or one leader said, don't bite the hand that feeds you. Do you think that they can follow through on that? Oh, Eamon, did you hear my question?
Oh, is that for me? I'm
sorry.
Yeah, look, I mean, the companies are clearly deciding this is worth doing, right? And you talk about the unpopularity of the billionaires, but the companies themselves, these big iconic American brands, are pretty well popular with the American public and well trusted by the American public.
Thanks,
and so what the companies have realized here is they have the power to sort of set the boundaries in American politics and say this is out of bounds.
We've got to leave it there with all of our friends. So thank you.